Power. It is the lifeblood of modern society. It runs our machines, heats our homes, and produces our food. Our modern world is dependent on access to an abundant supply of inexpensive energy. In the late 1950s, President Eisenhower introduced a new form of energy, nuclear power. It was cheaper and cleaner than oil or coal and was available in almost limitless quantities. A pound of uranium-235 can produce the heat energy of 150,000 tons of coal. Today, most of the developed countries in the world have nuclear power plants. The former Soviet Union was no exception. In fact, nuclear power was their power of choice.
We were told it was a great privilege to have a nuclear power plant built in our pristine area.
Then, in a split second on April 26, 1986, the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl power station erupted in a massive explosion, forcing the entire world to take another look at nuclear power. The disaster and its subsequent cover-up and consequences is a study in rights and responsibilities unlike any other event in history. It is a study of both the government's responsibilities to protect its citizens and of the citizens' rights to be informed, especially when they are in danger. Nuclear power works by fission, which heats up water, which produces steam, which turns turbines to create electricity. Because of the inherent danger of the fission process, all nuclear reactors employ elaborate safety systems to prevent an emergency. However, in Chernobyl's RBMK reactors, it was possible to override these systems and leave the core unprotected. And this is what was done, intentionally, in an effort to test whether the reactors could produce enough residual power to shut themselves down gracefully in an emergency. As the experiment commenced, the cooling systems in the reactor were shut off, and the reactor began to overheat. Soon the process wound out of control, and a tremendous steam explosion blew the reactor to pieces. Tons of nuclear fuel, graphite, and radioactive debris were hurled into the air. Radiation equal to 400 Hiroshima bombs exploded into the atmosphere. The dust rose into a mile-high pillar of red heat to begin a deadly voyage around the world. The cauldron below was brewing up every single element and isotope in the periodic table.
If the accident wasn't bad enough, the cover-up that followed was unconscionable.
The Soviet government was notified immediately, and immediately it set the wheels in motion to hide the severity of the accident from everyone, including its own citizens. A roadblock was set up to prevent anyone from entering or leaving the area. Firemen, unaware they were fighting an unquenchable atomic fire, assaulted the roof and aimed hoses into the flaming crater, but water makes a nuclear fire worse. The local defense militia was called in. Young soldiers were given only gauze masks and cloth jumpsuits to protect themselves, useless in a nuclear accident. They picked up pieces of radioactive material with their hands and ran as fast as they could to dispose of it. They had no idea they were running through an environment of 10,000 to 20,000 rads per hour, almost 1,000 times the allowable dose for a lifetime. After a day and a half, officials realized it would be necessary to evacuate the neighboring city of Pripyat. A local radio announcement mentioned a trifling accident at the power station and advised citizens to prepare for a temporary evacuation. They were to leave their apartments and wait on the sidewalks. No cars could leave the city.
We could see planes and helicopters overhead, but no one told us what was going on.
For 3 hours, the entire population of 45,000 stood in an invisible shower of isotopes. Everyone felt dizzy and nauseous, collapsing with fatigue and vomiting on the sidewalks from radiation sickness. Finally, more than 1,000 buses arrived. Assured that they'd be back in 2 to 3 days, people left most of their possessions behind. But they never came back. Everything they owned was contaminated. Pripyat became a ghost town. The next day, all the dogs and cats were rounded up and shot. They were too radioactive to let roam. Soon, nearby hospitals began filling with patients with blistered, cracked skin that did not heal. Their hair was falling out. Their bodies were filled with radiation. Victims who arrived later and lay in those beds vacated by earlier patients were more radioactive when they left than they had been when they arrived. Doctors suspected what was wrong, but they were told not to take radiation measurements. These documents show that information about radioactivity would not be shared with anyone. The medical records of those showing signs of radiation poisoning were systematically destroyed. The government adamantly insisted that there was no problem. In nearby schools, teachers began to notice that the children of party officials were being pulled to take sudden vacations. They, too, were assured that everything was normal.
Vasil Pasechnik was the head pediatrician in Chernihiv at the time of the accident. So he went out with his own Geiger counter towards the Chernobyl area, and he found that the radiation levels were way off the scale. And he was told to be quiet, not to start a panic. And because of his insistence over the next few days, he lost his post as the head pediatrician.
I will remember this day forever. I thought it was not a very serious accident because there was no official information. We couldn't do anything officially because it was prohibited. Only on the 10th day after the accident did they make a rule that we could administer preventive medicines, but by then it was too late.
Meanwhile, farm animals whose manure was toxic waste were slaughtered, but the meat was considered too valuable to destroy. It was diluted 1 to 10 and shipped all over the country to unsuspecting citizens.
На Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла авария.
The first official mention of the accident to the citizens of the Soviet Union came 3 days after the explosion. A brief announcement buried 25 minutes into the evening news. By April 30th, however, radiation levels in Kiev, 80 miles south of Chernobyl, were registering 100 times that of safe levels. When the Kiev Physics Institute reported this odd fact, they were asked to turn in their Geiger counters for recalibration. The radiation is within normal levels, they were told. What they were not told was that the government had arbitrarily increased the allowable standard by 50-fold. To the end, the Soviets insisted only 31 lives were lost as a result of the Chernobyl accident. Realistic estimates, however, placed the actual number closer to 31,000 deaths attributable to the immediate effects of radiation poisoning, while the longer-term effects would push that number into the millions. One expert predicts that the ultimate death toll resulting from the disaster will claim more victims than did World War II.
Before Chernobyl, we have about 84% absolutely healthy people in Ukraine, and after the 15 years after Chernobyl accident, we have about only 16%.
The Chernobyl accident has long been pushed off the front page by other stories, yet the problem lives on. A temporary sarcophagus was constructed over the crippled reactor to halt further leakage of radioactive material. Because construction was carried out under such perilous conditions and materials were in short supply, the structure is tenuous and has many gaping holes. It is only expected to last about 30 years. Inside, the core of the reactor is still highly volatile. Any natural disaster, like a flood, earthquake, or collapse of the roof, could result in the accident happening all over again. Meanwhile, 42 million cubic feet of radioactive waste sits in storage tanks near the plant awaiting ultimate disposal. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent nation, while the new government struggles to meet the basic needs of its impoverished citizens. Who now takes the responsibility for the mess left by its predecessors? Chernobyl's radioactivity will probably outlive civilization. We are as far from the last half-life of plutonium as we are from our semi-human ancestors who had not yet learned to make fire. Ukraine and the surrounding nations will long feel the burden of the Chernobyl disaster. Thousands of square miles of farmland are unfit for producing food. Many dangerous isotopes have found their way into the food chain, and every time it rains, more are washed into the soil. There are dramatically high rates of birth defects, nervous disorders, and cancers throughout the region. As Chernobyl clearly showed, a nuclear accident knows no borders. The irresponsible decisions regarding the Chernobyl accident cast a shadow on Gorbachev's policy of glasnost. It was a major factor in Ukraine claiming the right to independence, and like these children at the Chernihiv Children's Hospital, a nation of people are struggling to survive and be remembered in a land so contaminated by radiation there really is nowhere to hide.
Союз